Ice clinked in her glass, melting faster than her will to stay afloat. Harper was exactly 24 hours away from eviction, sitting in a dive bar that smelled of stale beer and broken promises. She didn't want romance. She just wanted a stiff drink. Then a shadow fell over her table. A man with eyes like winter frost leaned in, smelling of rain and expensive cologne. He didn't ask her name. He just slid a massive diamond across the sticky wood and whispered, "Be my fiancée, now." The neon sign outside Miller's pub had a flicker that matched the thumping behind Harper's eyes. A dull, rhythmic ache. She stared at the glass in front of her. 2 ice cubes, a wedge of lime that looked like it had given up on life 3 days ago, and 3 fingers of cheap vodka. It tasted like failure. The kind of failure that coated the back of your throat and made your eyes water, sharp and unforgiving. She took another sip anyway. 3 hours ago, Harper had been an auditor for a mid-sized logistics firm. 2 hours ago, she had noticed a glaring discrepancy in the offshore accounts. A clumsy, stupidly arrogant trail of numbers that pointed straight to a massive laundering operation. 1 hour ago, she had brought it to her boss. 45 minutes ago, she was fired. No severance, no references. Just a quiet threat delivered by a man who didn't blink, telling her that if she ever looked at another spreadsheet in this city, she wouldn't have fingers left to type with. So here she was, drinking away the last $40 to her name on a rainy Tuesday night. She was too exhausted to cry. The cynicism had settled into her bones, heavy and cold. The world was rigged. The house always won. The door to the pub opened. A gust of wet, freezing wind swept through the room, cutting through the smell of fried grease. Harper didn't look up, but she felt the shift in the room. The low murmur of the 3 other patrons died instantly. The bartender, a burly man named Dave, who usually had a loud mouth and a louder laugh, stopped wiping the counter. He froze, the rag suspended over a beer ring. The silence was sudden. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a forest when a predator steps into the clearing. Harper kept her eyes on her glass. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't stupid. Whatever was happening, she wanted no part of it. Heavy footsteps crossed the sticky linoleum, deliberate, unhurried. They stopped right beside her stool. She smelled him before she looked up. It wasn't the smell of a dive bar regular. It was the scent of sharp rain, crisp wool, and something darker underneath. Leather and a faint, metallic trace of gunpowder. Harper finally turned her head. He was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than her college education. His face was a study in hard angles and brutal symmetry. Jawline carved from granite, dark hair slicked back by the rain, and eyes the color of a bruised winter sky. He didn't look like a man who drank at Miller's. He looked like the man who owned the bank that held the mortgage on Miller's, and who was here to burn the place down for the insurance money. He looked at her, really looked at her. It wasn't a gaze that assessed her attractiveness. It was an appraisal, like she was a piece of real estate he was considering acquiring. "You're drinking well vodka on a Tuesday," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that vibrated over the ambient hum of the dying jukebox. "It gets the job done," Harper replied, her voice flat. She turned back to her glass. "If you're looking for a good time, buddy, you took a wrong turn at the financial district. I'm not interested." He didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out the stool next to her and sat down. He moved with a quiet grace that was deeply unsettling in a man of his size. "I'm not looking for a good time," he said. "I'm looking for a solution. Take an aspirin." "My problem isn't a headache. It's an inheritance." Harper let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Wow, let me get out my tiny violin for the rich guy." She picked up her glass, swirling the cheap liquor. "Go away. I've hit my quota for dealing with corrupt men in expensive suits today." That made him pause. For a fraction of a second, the cold mask cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine curiosity. "You lost your job today," he observed. It wasn't a question. Harper's grip on the glass tightened. "How do you know that? You're wearing a corporate blazer, but your ID badge is missing from the lapel. There's a clean square of fabric where it used to be. You have ink on your middle finger, meaning you were writing aggressively, probably packing up your desk. And you look like a woman who just realized the game is rigged." She stared at him, the alcohol fuzziness receding, replaced by a spike of adrenaline. "Who are you?" "My name is Vincent." He reached into his coat pocket. The bartender, still frozen across the room, visibly flinched. But Vincent didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small black velvet box. He placed it on the sticky wood between them. With a flick of his thumb, he popped it open. Under the dim, flickering neon light, the diamond caught the glare and practically exploded with brilliance. It was massive, emerald cut, flawless, set in a band of cold platinum. It was the kind of ring that bought silence, the kind of ring that bought lives. Harper stopped breathing. She looked from the ring to his winter frost eyes. "I need a wife," Vincent said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "By tomorrow morning. My father passed away yesterday. His will stipulates that I cannot take control of the family holdings, the legitimate ones, unless I am married. If I am not, the assets go into a trust managed by my uncle, a man who will burn the empire to the ground out of spite." "So go find a socialite," Harper whispered, unable to look away from the stone. "A socialite comes with family ties, expectations, entanglements. I don't want a partner. I want a ghost. I want someone who has nothing, no one, and nowhere to go." He leaned in closer. The smell of rain and danger wrapped around her. "I want someone who understands a transaction." Harper swallowed hard. "You don't even know me." "I know you're desperate," Vincent said smoothly. "I know you need money. I will pay off your debts. I will put $1 million in a secure account in your name. We stay married for 1 year to satisfy the board. You ask no questions. You go to the events. You smile for the cameras. After a year, we divorce quietly. You walk away." It was insane. It was the plot of a bad movie. But the eviction notice in her purse was real. The threat from her boss was real. "What if I say no?" she asked. Vincent didn't blink. "I close the box. I walk out. You finish your vodka. And tomorrow, you pack your bags and sleep on the street." He wasn't threatening her. He was just stating facts. That was what terrified her the most. There was no malice in his eyes, just the cold, brutal calculus of survival. Harper looked at the ring. Then she looked at her empty glass. She didn't have a safety net. She didn't have a family to call. She was falling, and this terrifying, dangerous man was offering her a parachute woven out of razor wire. She reached out and picked up the ring. It was heavy. "I want $2 million, Harper said, her voice shaking only slightly. "And I want it in writing." A slow, predatory smirk touched the corner of Vincent's mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "Be my fiancée. Now." The transition from the grime of Miller's pub to the interior of Vincent's car felt like stepping onto another planet. It was a Mercedes Maybach, bulletproof, the windows tinted so dark they were practically black. The leather seats smelled like wealth and silence. As soon as the heavy door thudded shut, cutting off the sound of the rain, the reality of what she had just done crashed over Harper. She was sitting next to a man who likely ran a criminal syndicate, wearing a ring that cost more than she would make in a lifetime, speeding away from the only life she knew. Vincent sat beside her, staring straight ahead. He had barely spoken since she agreed. He made a single phone call, uttering 2 words. "It's done." "Where are we going?" Harper asked. Her voice sounded small in the spacious cabin. "My residence," Vincent replied, not looking at her. "My lawyers are waiting. We need to formalize the contract before the sun comes up." "You have lawyers working at 3 in the morning?" "I have lawyers who work when I tell them to work." The city blurred past the windows. The neon signs turned to towering skyscrapers, then to the quiet, tree-lined streets of an exclusive neighborhood where the houses were set far back from the road behind wrought-iron gates. The car glided through a set of massive gates that opened automatically, crunching over a gravel driveway before stopping in front of a sprawling, modern mansion of glass and black steel. It looked like a fortress. A man in a dark suit opened her door before she even reached for the handle. Harper stepped out into the freezing rain, pulling her cheap blazer tight across her chest. "Inside," Vincent commanded gently, putting a hand at the small of her back. The touch shocked her. It was heavy, warm and distinctly territorial. The interior of the house was aggressively sterile. Vast expanses of white marble, black leather, and modern art that looked like blood splatters. It didn't look lived in. It looked like a staging ground. In the center of the massive living room sat a glass table. A man with thinning grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses stood waiting, a thick stack of papers spread out before him. "Harper, this is Leo," Vincent said, shrugging off his wet overcoat and tossing it to a silent staff member. "He handles my legal affairs." Leo didn't smile. He pushed a pen across the glass table. "Miss, the terms are as Mr. Moretti outlined. 1 year, $2 million, deposited upon the finalization of the divorce. A monthly allowance of $20,000 for maintenance. You will reside in this house. You will attend all required functions. You will not speak to the press, the police, or any unauthorized personnel regarding Mr. Moretti's business." Harper walked slowly to the table. She looked down at the dense legal jargon. Her accountant brain, trained to find the hidden traps, woke up. She picked up the contract, flipping past the first 3 pages. She ignored the blank stare Leo gave her. "Section 4, Clause B," Harper said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It says here that any breach of decorum or public embarrassment results in a forfeiture of the final sum. That's entirely subjective. Who defines public embarrassment? You?" She looked up at Vincent. Vincent crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. He looked mildly amused. "Leo does." "No," Harper said, tapping the paper. "Strike it, or define it specifically. I'm not giving you a legal loophole to screw me out of my money just because I used the wrong fork at a dinner party." Leo looked horrified. He turned to Vincent, expecting the boss to explode. Instead, Vincent let out a low, rough sound that might have been a chuckle. "Change it, Leo. Specifics only. Criminal charges or infidelity," Harper kept reading. "And what about my safety? Your world isn't exactly corporate logistics. If I take a bullet because I'm standing next to you, what happens to the money?" "If you take a bullet," Vincent said softly, "you won't have much use for the money." "My next of kin gets it," Harper fired back, even though she didn't really have a next of kin. It was the principle of the thing. She was terrified, yes, but she refused to be a helpless victim. If she was selling her life, she was going to get a good price. Vincent's eyes darkened, locking onto hers. The amusement vanished, replaced by a sharp, assessing intensity. He walked slowly toward her, stopping only when the tips of his expensive leather shoes touched her scuffed flats. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. The smell of rain and danger was overwhelming now. "I don't let things that belong to me get broken, Harper," he whispered. The sheer authority in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "You are my fiancée. No one will touch you. No one will look at you wrong. If they do, their families will be mourning closed caskets. Do you understand?" It wasn't a comfort. It was a terrifying promise of violence. Harper held his gaze, refusing to back down, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Put it in writing anyway." For a long moment, the room was dead silent. Then Vincent turned to the lawyer. "Add a hazard clause. 5 million to a charity of her choice if she is injured as a result of my associations." Leo swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he made the notations. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." Harper took the pen. Her hand was steady as she signed her name on the dotted line. The ink bled into the paper, sealing her fate. She was now the property of Vincent Moretti. "Good," Vincent said, stepping back. The cold mask was back in place. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you meet the family. And Harper?" She looked up. "Don't wear that blazer again. It depresses me." The dress was a weapon. It was a deep, midnight blue silk slip that clung to her curves like a second skin, completely backless, with a slit that travelled dangerously high up her thigh. Vincent had a stylist sent to the house at noon. 4 hours of hair, makeup, and fittings later, Harper barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The exhausted, cynical accountant was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she belonged in the dark, opulent world of the Moretti syndicate. Vincent walked into her bedroom without knocking. He stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing a bespoke black suit, looking every inch the ruthless cartel boss he was. His eyes swept over her, from the diamond currently flashing on her finger to the bare expanse of her back. For a second, the frost in his eyes melted into something heated, something raw and hungry. But he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the usual icy stoicism. "You look—" He paused, adjusting his cuffs. "Adequate, thanks," Harper said dryly, grabbing a small silver clutch. "I was really aiming for adequate, so what's the play tonight?" "We are dining at Il Forno," Vincent said, leading her out of the room and down the sweeping staircase. "It's a neutral ground. My Uncle Carmine will be there. He is the one trying to seize the estate. He believes my father's death has left a power vacuum. He will look for any weakness in you to prove this engagement is a sham." So I just smile and nod? "No," Vincent said, pausing at the front door. He turned to face her, his expression grim. "Carmine respects strength. If you act like a meek little mouse, he will crush you. Do not let him speak down to you, but do not insult him outright. Play the game." "I don't know the rules of your game." "Then make them up." The drive to the restaurant was suffocatingly tense. Harper stared out the window, practicing her breathing. She had faced hostile boardrooms before. She had stared down aggressive vice presidents who tried to hide missing millions. This was just a different kind of boardroom, a deadlier one. Il Forno was a classic, old-school Italian establishment. The air smelled heavily of garlic, roasted tomatoes, expensive truffles, and cigar smoke. The maitre d' practically bowed when Vincent walked in, leading them past the crowded main floor to a heavy oak door in the back. A private room. Vincent placed his hand on the small of her back again. This time, Harper leaned into it slightly, anchoring herself against his solid frame. He pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by a massive chandelier. Around a long mahogany table sat 5 men. They were older, with weathered faces, wearing expensive suits and heavy gold watches. The atmosphere was instantly oppressive. The conversation stopped the moment Vincent entered. At the head of the table sat an older man with silver hair and eyes that looked like dead coals. Uncle Carmine. "Vincent," Carmine said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He didn't stand up. "You're late. I was busy, Uncle," Vincent replied smoothly, pulling out a chair for Harper. He sat right next to her, their shoulders almost touching. "Traffic." "And who is this?" Carmine asked, his eyes raking over Harper with blatant disrespect. "Your new secretary." "This is my fiancée, Harper," Vincent said. The word fiancé hung in the air like a drawn sword. A younger man down the table, slicked back hair, arrogant smirk, snorted into his wine glass. "Fiancé? Come on, Vince. The old man hasn't been in the ground for 2 days, and you pull a fiancé out of thin air. We aren't idiots. How much did you pay her?" "Tony," Vincent's voice dropped an octave, the sound vibrating with lethal intent. "Speak carefully. You only have one tongue." Tony held his hands up in mock surrender, but his eyes were malicious. He turned to Harper. "So, Harper, tell me, what is it you do? What great empire does your family run that makes you a suitable match for the head of the Moretti family?" Harper felt the weight of 6 men staring at her, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to stutter. She felt Vincent tense beside her. She took a slow sip of her water. She set the glass down. She looked Tony directly in the eye. "I was an auditor for a logistics firm," Harper said, her voice clear, calm, and utterly devoid of intimidation. Tony laughed. "An accountant? Really? You married a bean counter, Vince?" "A bean counter," Harper interrupted, her voice cutting through his laughter like a scalpel. "Who knows how to read a ledger? For instance, I'm aware of the current bottleneck in the East Coast shipping routes, specifically the docks in Baltimore. The ones you manage, Tony, isn't it?" Tony's smile vanished. "What about them?" "Well," Harper leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. "Given the volume of imports coming through Sector 4, your overhead costs are roughly 30% higher than the industry standard. A blind man could see that the fuel expenditures don't match the mileage logs. Either your truck drivers are taking the scenic route across the Atlantic, or someone is skimming roughly $400,000 a quarter off the top and hiding it in bloated maintenance invoices." The room went deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop. Tony turned pale, his eyes darting to Carmine, who was suddenly looking at his nephew with murderous intent. I don't know what you're talking about," Tony stammered. "It's basic math," Harper said pleasantly, leaning back in her chair. "But then again, I'm just a bean counter. What do I know?" Under the table, out of sight of the men, Vincent's large, warm hand clamped down over her knee. He squeezed it once, a heavy, grounded pressure. It was an anchor. It was approval. Carmine slowly turned his gaze from Tony to Harper. The disrespect was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating respect. "She has teeth," Carmine murmured to Vincent. "She does," Vincent agreed softly, picking up his wineglass. He looked at Harper, a rare, genuine ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "That's why I'm marrying her." For the first time since she had walked into that dive bar, Harper realized she wasn't just a pawn in this game, she was a player. And the man sitting next to her wasn't just a monster. He was a shield. The dinner had just begun, but the war for the empire was officially on. The silence in the Maybach on the ride back to the estate was heavy. Not the suffocating, tense silence of their first ride, but something denser. It was the quiet of a bomb squad walking away from a diffused wire. Harper kept her eyes pinned to the rain streaking the tinted glass. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like a bruised knuckle rapping against her ribs. She had just accused a made man of stealing from his own family. She didn't know the specifics of Mafia hierarchy, but she knew corporate retaliation. Usually it meant a severance package and a gag order. Here, it likely meant a shallow grave off the interstate. Vincent poured a measure of scotch from the crystal decanter hidden in the armrest console. He didn't offer her any. He drank it neat, staring straight ahead. "You made an enemy tonight," Vincent said. His voice was flat, betraying no emotion. "I pointed out a statistical anomaly," Harper replied, refusing to look at him. She rubbed her arms. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her cold and acutely aware of the thin silk of her dress. "Math doesn't have a vendetta. Tony does. He is petty, violent, and currently humiliated in front of the only man who keeps him breathing." Vincent turned his head, his winter frost eyes pinning her to the leather seat. "Why did you do it?" Harper finally looked at him. "Because Carmine was looking at me like I was a disposable piece of trash. And because you told me not to play the mouse." "I told you not to let him speak down to you. I didn't tell you to gut his nephew at the dinner table. Would you rather I sat there and let him pull the thread on this fake engagement until the whole sweater unraveled?" Harper snapped, the exhaustion finally eroding her polite filter. "I did my job, Vincent. I secured the asset being you." Vincent didn't yell. He didn't reprimand her. He simply watched her with that unnerving, predatory stillness. Then he reached over. Harper flinched, bracing for violence. Instead, Vincent's hand brushed past her shoulder. He grabbed the heavy cashmere blanket neatly folded on the seat behind them and pulled it over her lap. He tucked the edges around her bare arms, his knuckles briefly grazing the cold skin of her collarbone. "You did your job," Vincent agreed softly. He leaned back into his corner of the car. "You were brilliant and entirely reckless. I don't have a death wish, if that's what you're implying. Good, because starting tomorrow, you don't go anywhere without Arthur." "Who is Arthur?" "The man driving this car," Vincent said. The partition behind the driver's seat was up, but Harper had noticed the sheer size of the man when he opened her door earlier. "He answers to me, but his sole purpose now is keeping you breathing. If he tells you to get down, you get down. If he tells you to run, you run." Harper swallowed the lump in her throat. The reality of the $2 million was setting in. It wasn't a lottery ticket. It was combat pay. They arrived at the mansion. The storm had worsened, the wind howling off the lake, battering the glass walls of the house. Inside, the sterile warmth offered little comfort. Vincent walked her to the base of the sweeping staircase. He paused, one hand in his pocket. "Tomorrow is the wedding," he said, stating a logistical fact rather than a romantic milestone. "A tailor will arrive at 9 to fit you for a dress. The judge arrives at 3. We sign the papers in the library, and we host a reception in the ballroom at 7. Harper nodded slowly. "Who is on the guest list? Who is—" "The board, the capos, everyone who needs to see that my father's empire is secure." He stepped closer. The smell of scotch and rain invaded her space again. "They will be watching you, Harper. They will look for cracks. Tony will be looking for blood." "I know how to smile for a camera," she said quietly. Vincent reached out. His thumb traced the sharp line of her jaw. His touch was calloused, rough against her skin. It was a gesture of ownership, but there was a strange, terrifying gentleness to it. "Don't just smile," he murmured. "Look at me like I'm the only thing keeping you alive, because right now, I am." He dropped his hand and walked away, disappearing into the dark corridors of the house. Harper stood alone in the cavernous foyer, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. The morning light did nothing to soften the brutalist architecture of Vincent's estate. Harper sat in a velvet chair in the center of a spare guest room, surrounded by explosions of white tulle, silk, and lace. A nervous tailor named Francois darted around her, pinning the hem of a sleek, long-sleeved crepe gown. It was elegant, conservative, and aggressively expensive. There was no lace, no sequins. It looked like armor. Harper approved. Arthur stood by the door. He was a mountain of a man in a dark suit, his eyes continuously scanning the hallway. He hadn't said a single word to her since introducing himself at breakfast, but his presence was a heavy, suffocating reminder of her new reality. "Perfect, perfectly elegant," Francois muttered through a mouthful of pins. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Arthur shifted instantly, his hand hovering over his jacket, but relaxed slightly when a woman walked in. She was in her late 50s, wearing a sharp Chanel suit and holding a lit cigarette, completely ignoring the estate's strict no-smoking policy. Her hair was dyed a harsh platinum blonde, pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She had Carmine's dead coal eyes. Camilla, Tony's mother. "Leave us," Camilla barked at the tailor. Francois looked terrified. He glanced at Harper, who gave him a curt nod. He scurried out of the room, leaving his pins scattered on the floor. Camilla took a long drag of her cigarette, looking Harper up and down. She didn't look at the dress. She looked at Harper like she was inspecting a disease. "Arthur, wait in the hall," Camilla said. Arthur didn't move. He didn't even blink. "Mr. Moretti's orders are that I remain in the room, Mrs. Rossi." Camilla sneered, but she didn't push the issue with the bodyguard. She walked slowly in a circle around Harper, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "So," Camilla said, her voice dripping with venom, "you are the little calculator who thinks she can play with the adults." Harper kept her posture rigid. She didn't adjust the dress. She didn't break eye contact. "I'm just a woman getting fitted for her wedding, Camilla. Is there a problem?" "The problem is your mouth." Camilla stopped directly in front of her. "Tony is my blood. You humiliated him in front of the Don. You made him look weak." "Tony made himself look weak by leaving a paper trail a first-year accounting student could follow," Harper replied smoothly. "If you want to steal from the family, you should at least hire a competent bookkeeper." Camilla's hand twitched, moving toward Harper's face. Arthur took a single, thunderous step forward. The floorboards literally groaned. Camilla froze. She lowered her hand, her lips thinning into a vicious line. "You think Vincent will protect you forever," Camilla whispered, leaning in. "He doesn't care about you. You're a signature on a document. The moment that trust is dissolved and the money is moved, you are expendable. And when he's done playing house, I will personally see to it that you end up at the bottom of the harbor." Harper felt the cold grip of panic squeeze her lungs, but her face remained a mask of polite, corporate indifference. She had dealt with hostile takeovers before. The stakes were just higher now. "Expendable," Harper repeated softly. She took a step toward Camilla, ignoring Arthur's subtle movement behind her. "Let's talk about expendable, Camilla. Tony skimmed 400,000 this quarter. I imagine he's been doing it for years. Where did the money go?" Camilla's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "It didn't go to his lifestyle," Harper continued, her mind clicking into the familiar rhythm of an audit. "Tony drives a leased Porsche and rents a penthouse. He has gambling debts at 2 casinos in Atlantic City. I saw the markers in the secondary ledger Vincent's lawyer left on the desk this morning. He's broke." Camilla's face lost a fraction of its color. "Which means," Harper said, her voice dropping to a surgical whisper, "Carmine is going to demand that money back. The family doesn't forgive debts. If Tony doesn't have it, they will look to you. They will take your house in the Hamptons. They will take your offshore accounts. You are threatening me, Camilla, but you are the one standing on a trap door. Silence stretched between them, heavy and toxic. Camilla's cigarette burned down to the filter, the ash falling onto the pristine Persian rug. "You arrogant little bitch," Camilla hissed, her voice shaking. "Enjoy the reception tonight," Harper said, turning her back on the woman and looking at herself in the mirror. "I hear the champagne is excellent." Camilla spun on her heel and marched out of the room, slamming the heavy doors behind her. Harper stood completely still for 10 seconds. Then her knees buckled. Arthur moved with surprising speed, catching her elbow before she hit the floor. He righted her, his grip firm and impersonal. "Breathe, Miss Harper," Arthur said. His voice was a deep, rumbling baritone. Harper took a ragged breath, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked up at the giant of a man. "Did I just sign my own death warrant?" Arthur looked at the door, then back down at her. A faint, grim smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No, ma'am, but you definitely ruined her morning." The library of the Moretti estate was a room built for intimidation. 2-story walls of dark mahogany bookshelves, a massive marble fireplace roaring with heat, and rain lashing aggressively against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was 3 o'clock. Harper stood by the fireplace. The crepe dress fit flawlessly, an elegant shield against the cold stares of the room. She held a small, tight bouquet of white calla lilies. They looked like funeral flowers. There were only 6 people in the room. The judge, an older man sweating profusely under the weight of his task. Leo, the lawyer, clutching a leather briefcase. Arthur, standing by the door. Carmine, sitting in a leather wingback chair, his dead eyes fixed on the proceedings. And Vincent. Vincent wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that looked cut from the night sky. He looked lethal. He stepped up beside her, smelling of petrichor and bergamot. He didn't look at her as the judge began speaking. The ceremony was devoid of romance. It was a transaction read aloud in legal statutes. There was no mention of love, no poetry about 2 souls intertwining. It was a transfer of status, a locking of assets. "Do you, Vincent Moretti, take this woman?" "I do," Vincent said. His voice was a flat, unyielding command. "And do you, Harper?" Harper stared at the judge. She felt the weight of Carmine's gaze boring into the side of her head. She thought of her eviction notice. She thought of Camilla's threat. She thought of the $2 million. "I do," Harper said. Her voice didn't shake. Vincent turned to her. He produced a simple, thick platinum band. He took her left hand. His grip was warm, his fingers strong and calloused. He slid the ring onto her finger, pushing it up against the massive diamond he had given her in the bar. "By the power vested in me," the judge stammered, wiping his brow, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." This was the variable she hadn't accounted for. They hadn't rehearsed this. Vincent didn't hesitate. He stepped into her space, completely blocking out the rest of the room. His hands came up, framing her face. The warmth of his palms seeped into her cold skin. He tilted her chin up. Harper held her breath. He leaned down. His lips brushed hers. It wasn't rough, and it wasn't a punishment. It was a deliberate, heavy pressure, a brand. For a fraction of a second, she felt the raw, tightly coiled violence beneath his composed exterior. A man capable of terrible things, showing absolute restraint. When he pulled back, his eyes met hers. They weren't cold anymore. They were dark, assessing, and dangerous in a completely different way. "Smile, Mrs. Moretti," he murmured, his breath ghosting over her lips. "We won." The reception in the ballroom was a masterclass in psychological warfare. 100 people, all dressed in designer clothes, drinking expensive champagne and smiling at each other while calculating the quickest way to slit a throat. Vincent kept her glued to his side. He introduced her to capos, politicians, and union bosses. Harper played her part perfectly. She gave polite, empty answers. She laughed at terrible jokes. She memorized faces and names, filing them away in the mental spreadsheets of her mind. She saw Tony glaring at her from across the room, drinking heavily. She saw Camilla whispering furiously to another woman in diamonds. By midnight, her feet were bleeding in her heels, and the fake smile was permanently etched into her jaw muscles. Finally, the last guest left. The heavy doors of the estate locked. The silence returned. Vincent walked her up the sweeping staircase to the master suite. This was another boundary they hadn't discussed. The contract said they had to reside in the house. It didn't specify sleeping arrangements. He opened the heavy double doors. The master suite was massive, dominated by a king-sized bed, dark wood furniture, and a wall of glass overlooking the dark, churning lake. Harper stopped just inside the doorway, clutching her small clutch bag like a weapon. Vincent walked over to a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed her one. "Drink," he ordered quietly. "You've been drinking champagne for 4 hours on an empty stomach." She took the glass, her fingers brushing his. "What happens now?" Vincent took off his suit jacket, tossing it over a chair. He undid his tie and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt, stripping away the armor of the Don and leaving only the man. He looked exhausted. "Now we sleep," Vincent said, walking over to a heavy oak door on the far side of the room. He opened it, revealing a massive, connected sitting room with a plush sofa. "You take the bed. I will sleep in here." Harper blinked, surprised by the rush of relief and the strange, entirely irrational prick of disappointment. She pushed the second feeling down, drowning it in logic. "I can take the sofa," she offered. "It's your bed." Vincent turned back to look at her. The moonlight filtering through the window cut across his face, highlighting the sharp angles and the deep shadows under his eyes. "You are my wife," Vincent said, the word sounding strange and heavy on his tongue. "You don't sleep on furniture in my house." He walked back toward her, stopping a few feet away. He looked at the white crepe dress, the rigid posture she was still holding. "You survived today, Harper," he said softly. "You outmaneuvered Camilla. You didn't flinch at the altar. You held court with monsters for 5 hours. You can drop the shield now." Harper looked at him. The cynical auditor who thought the world was just a rigged ledger felt something crack in her chest. She was standing in the bedroom of a Mafia boss, wearing a ring bought with blood money, and it was the safest she had felt in months. "I don't know how to drop the shield," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent held her gaze for a long moment. "I know," he said. "We'll work on it." He turned and walked into the sitting room, closing the heavy door behind him with a soft click. Harper stood alone in the massive bedroom. She set the water glass down. She reached behind her back and unzipped the dress, letting the armor fall to the floor. The war for the Empire had been won today, but as she looked at the closed door separating her from Vincent, she realized a much more dangerous battle had just begun. 3 weeks bled into 4. The Moretti estate, for all its sweeping lake views and heated marble floors, was a gilded cage. Harper quickly learned the rhythm of her captivity. Breakfast at 7 in the solarium. Vincent leaving at 8, flanked by a phalanx of silent men in dark suits. Hours of empty, suffocating silence, broken only by the polite, meaningless chatter of the household staff. And Arthur. always Arthur. The giant bodyguard was a permanent shadow. If she walked to the library, Arthur stood by the mahogany doors. If she sat on the terrace to watch the grey autumn waves crash against the private dock, Arthur stood 10 feet away, hands clasped, eyes scanning the perimeter. By day 25, Harper was losing her mind. She was a woman who lived by numbers, by puzzles, by finding the missing pieces in a chaotic world. Sitting still was a slow form of torture. It was past midnight on a Thursday when she finally broke the routine. Vincent's office was located in the East Wing, a room off-limits to everyone except his inner circle. Harper didn't care. She walked down the dimly lit hallway, her bare feet silent on the Persian runners. She wore oversized cashmere sweatpants and a tight-ribbed tank top, clothes she had bought online because the designer wardrobe Vincent provided felt like wearing someone else's skin. She pushed the heavy oak door open. Vincent was sitting behind a massive desk carved from black walnut. Only a single desk lamp illuminated the room, casting deep, harsh shadows across his face. He was staring at a laptop screen, a half-empty glass of scotch resting near his keyboard. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that sleep couldn't fix. He didn't reach for the gun resting on the edge of the desk, but his hand hovered over it for a microsecond before he recognized her. "You should be asleep, Harper," he said, his voice a low gravel scrape in the quiet room. "I'm going crazy," she stated flatly, walking into the room and sitting in one of the leather wingback chairs opposite him. She pulled her knees to her chest. "I have read every book in your library that isn't in Latin. I have watched the lake freeze over. If I have to spend another afternoon doing a jigsaw puzzle while Arthur watches me like a hawk, I am going to jump out a window just to feel something." Vincent closed the laptop. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's for your safety. Tony has been quiet. Too quiet. Carmine is pushing for a board vote to restructure the offshore trusts. It is a delicate time." "I know it's a delicate time," Harper said. "That's why you need me." Vincent opened his eyes. The winter frost gaze locked onto hers. "I am paying you to be my wife, to smile, to exist. You're paying me because I have a brain," Harper countered, dropping her legs and leaning forward. "Vincent, you look like a man trying to plug a dam with his fingers. You inherited an empire built on blood and bribes, and your uncle is actively trying to bankrupt it from the inside out so he can take over the scraps. I am an auditor, a damn good one. Let me look at the books." Silence descended on the room. It was thick, heavy with the unspoken rules of the world she had married into. Wives didn't look at the books. Wives didn't ask questions. "The ledgers are not corporate spreadsheets, Harper," Vincent said softly. His tone wasn't condescending. It was a warning. "They document felonies, extortion, money laundering. If you look at them, you cross a line. You are no longer just a civilian playing a part. You become an accomplice." "I took $2 million to marry a mob boss," Harper said, her voice deadpan. "I think the civilian ship sailed the night I signed the marriage license." Vincent stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The tension hummed in the air between them, electric and sharp. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and turned the laptop to face her. "Read-only access," Vincent said. "Folder marked Chesapeake. Start with the shipping manifests from the last 3 quarters. Harper stood up and walked around the desk. There wasn't a second chair. Vincent didn't move to get one. Instead, he simply pushed his chair back a few inches, making space for her to stand beside him. She leaned over the desk, her arm brushing his shoulder. The scent of bergamot and scotch enveloped her. She ignored the sudden spike in her heart rate and focused on the screen. The numbers cascaded down the monitor. It took her exactly 14 minutes to find the rot. Here. Harper pointed a slender finger at the screen, tapping a column of dates. Look at the lag times. The cargo ships from Genoa dock in Baltimore on the 3rd of the month, but the warehouse inventory isn't logged until the 7th. 4 days of missing time. Vincent leaned in, his chest pressed lightly against her arm. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating off him. Customs delays. The Port Authority is notoriously slow. No. Harper shook her head, her mind clicking into its purest, most analytical state. Customs logs are public. I checked them yesterday out of boredom. The ships clear customs in 24 hours. For 3 days, that cargo sits in a blind spot. And look at the fuel expenditures for the local trucking routes during those exact 3 days. She scrolled down, bringing up a secondary spreadsheet. It spikes by nearly 40%. They aren't just letting the cargo sit, they're moving it, off the books, repackaging it, hiding the high-value contraband, and routing it through dummy corporations before bringing the legitimate goods to your warehouses. Vincent was perfectly still. Who? The trucking contracts are signed by a company called Apex Logistics. Run it. Vincent's fingers flew across the keyboard. A corporate registry file popped up. The CEO was listed as a man named Dominic Vance. I don't know him, Vincent said, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. Look at the registered address, Harper instructed. Vincent highlighted the address. He froze. It was a commercial property in the financial district, a property owned by a holding company that Vincent's father had deeded to Carmine 10 years ago. It's not Tony, Harper whispered, the gravity of the discovery settling over them. Tony skimming 400,000 was just a distraction, a sloppy mistake by an arrogant kid. Carmine is bleeding you dry. He's intercepting the most lucrative shipments, selling them off-market, and starving your legitimate cash flow. He wants you to default on the union payouts next month. When you do, the capos will lose faith in you, and he steps in as the savior. Vincent slowly closed the laptop. The quiet click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He didn't yell. He didn't break anything, but the air around him dropped 10 degrees. He was terrifying in his stillness. This was the Don. This was the man who ordered men to disappear. He turned his head to look at her. They were inches apart. You found in 14 minutes what my accountants have missed for 6 months, Vincent said. His voice was a soft, deadly murmur. Your accountants are terrified of you, Harper replied, refusing to back away from his intense gaze. They only look where you tell them to look. I don't. Vincent raised a hand. His knuckles brushed against her cheek, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. His touch was burning hot against her cold skin. It wasn't the possessive, theatrical touch from the wedding. It was something else, something terrifyingly genuine. You are a very dangerous woman, Harper, he breathed. I'm an auditor, she corrected softly. I just follow the math. The math, Vincent said, standing up. He was inches taller than her, imposing and absolute. Just got us a war. The war didn't start with explosions. It started with an invitation. 4 days after Harper unraveled the Chesapeake ledger, an embossed envelope arrived at the estate. Carmine was hosting a charity gala at the Grand Hotel downtown. Attendance for the head of the Moretti family and his new bride was not optional. It was a public test of unity. Declining would show weakness. Vincent spent the intervening days ruthlessly severing Carmine's supply lines, using Harper's data to systematically dismantle the dummy corporations. The retaliation was inevitable. They both knew it. Harper sat in the back of the Maybach, the heavy cashmere blanket draped over her lap. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that cost more than a car. Vincent sat beside her in a stark black tuxedo. His posture was rigid, his eyes scanning the rainy city streets through the tinted glass. Arthur was driving. In the passenger seat sat a new addition, a wiry, silent man named Silas, who carried 2 custom Glocks under his jacket. "You stay by my side," Vincent ordered, not looking at her. "You do not eat or drink anything that I haven't handed to you. If I touch the small of your back twice, you walk immediately to Arthur, no questions asked." "Understood," Harper said. Her throat was dry. They were navigating the narrow, winding streets of the old industrial district, a shortcut Arthur used to avoid the congested highway. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the streetlights into blurry halos. It happened in the span of 3 seconds. A heavy garbage truck, completely dark, suddenly reversed out of a blind alley directly into their path. Arthur slammed on the brakes. The Maybach's massive tires shrieked on the wet asphalt, the anti-lock brakes violently shuddering as the car skidded to a halt inches from the truck's steel bumper. "Ambush!" Arthur roared. Before the word fully left his mouth, a black SUV slammed into the rear of the Maybach, jarring them violently forward. Harper's head snapped back against the headrest, her teeth clicking together. Vincent moved with terrifying speed. He unclipped his seatbelt and launched his body over hers, pressing her down into the leather seat. "Get down and stay down," he barked. The first gunshot shattered the illusion of safety. It didn't penetrate the bulletproof glass, but it struck the window directly above Harper's head with a deafening, echoing crack, leaving a massive spiderweb of white fractures. More bullets followed, a relentless, hammering hail of lead against the reinforced chassis. "3 shooters, right side," Silas yelled from the front, racking the slide of his weapon. "Drive through it, Arthur," Vincent commanded, his arm a heavy, unyielding shield across Harper's torso. "Transmission is shot. The rear impact took the axle," Arthur yelled back. The engine revved uselessly, a high-pitched whine that signaled their doom. They were boxed in. A sitting duck, Harper pressed her face into the cold leather. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. This was the reality of the $2 million. This was the hazard clause. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the deafening roar of gunfire. "Think," she ordered herself. "Panic kills. Math saves." She forced her eyes open. She looked at the dashboard. She looked at the street outside through the fractured glass. "Vincent!" she yelled over the noise. He didn't look down. He had a weapon drawn now, waiting for the inevitable moment the armor failed. "Stay down, Harper." "Vincent, listen to me." She grabbed his wrist, digging her nails into his skin. "The truck in front, it's empty. It's a blockade, not a firing position. The shooters are all in the alley to the right." "And?" Vincent demanded, his eyes fixed on the crumbling window. "And Arthur's side is clear," Harper yelled. "The left side of the street is a construction zone. There's a temporary chain-link fence. Behind it is the subway maintenance access." She had memorized the city grid years ago for logistical routing. It was useless trivia until right now. "If we bail out the left, we can drop into the tunnels. They can't follow us with cars." Vincent looked at Arthur. "Is the left side clear?" Arthur checked the mirrors. "Clear, boss, but the glass won't hold another 30 seconds. Vincent looked down at Harper. His eyes were wild, stripped of all the cold, aristocratic polish. He looked like a wolf cornered in a trap. "When I say go," Vincent said, his voice dropping into a deadly calm, "you climb over my seat, out Arthur's door, and you run for that fence. You do not stop. You do not look back." "I'm not leaving without you," Harper said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. They were entirely irrational. He was a mafia boss. He was her employer. But as she looked at him, shielded by his body, she realized she meant it. Vincent's jaw locked. "You will do exactly as I say." The window on the right side began to bow inward, the integrity of the ballistic glass failing under concentrated fire. "Now!" Vincent roared. Silas kicked his door open and laid down a deafening barrage of suppressing fire over the hood of the car. Arthur threw his door open, grabbing Harper by the collar of her expensive dress and yanking her out of the back seat with brutal efficiency. Harper hit the wet pavement hard, scraping her knees through the silk. The cold rain was a shock to her system. "Move!" Arthur yelled, shoving her toward the chain-link fence. She scrambled up, slipping on her heels. She kicked them off, running barefoot across the jagged gravel of the construction site. She reached the fence and threw her weight against it. It rattled but held. Arthur arrived a second later, hoisting her up by the waist and practically throwing her over the top. She landed in the mud on the other side, gasping for air. Gunfire raged behind her. She scrambled to her feet and turned around, clutching the chain-link metal. Vincent was out of the car. He wasn't running. He was standing behind the open door of the Maybach, returning fire with lethal precision. She saw one of the shadows in the alley drop. "Vincent!" Harper screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "Get her down the hatch, Arthur," Vincent yelled, dropping an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. Arthur grabbed Harper's arm, pulling her toward a heavy steel grate set into the concrete. He hauled it open with a groan of metal. "Down, now. Not without him." Harper fought against Arthur's grip, her eyes fixed on Vincent. Suddenly, a heavy rifle caliber punched through the Maybach's door. Vincent staggered back, clutching his left shoulder. He went down on one knee. "Vincent!" Harper shrieked. Arthur cursed viciously. He let go of Harper, drawing his own weapon, and stepped forward to lay down cover fire. Vincent didn't stay down. With his right hand, he fired 3 rapid shots into the alley, forcing the attackers into cover. He pushed off the car, sprinting towards the fence. He vaulted it with a one-handed, ragged grace, landing heavily in the mud beside Harper. His tuxedo was ruined. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood rapidly turning the white fabric of his shirt a dark, oily black. Arthur dropped through the grate, and Vincent grabbed Harper's waist with his good arm, pulling her down into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, just as a fresh wave of bullets sparked against the concrete where they had been standing. Arthur hauled the heavy steel grate shut from the inside, plunging them into pitch blackness. The sound of the gunfire was instantly muffled, replaced by the rushing of water and the heavy, ragged breathing of the 3 survivors. "Are you hit?" Vincent demanded, his voice tight with pain. His hand frantically ran over her shoulders, her face, checking for blood. I'm fine," Harper gasped, grabbing his hand to stop him. Her fingers came away slick with his blood. "You're shot." "It's a through and through," Vincent grunted, leaning heavily against the damp concrete wall. "Arthur, secure the perimeter." "On it, boss," Arthur said, clicking on a small tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the grimy brick walls of the tunnel. Harper looked at Vincent in the harsh glare of the flashlight. His face was pale, sweat mixing with the rain on his forehead. The cold, untouchable Don was gone. He looked mortal. He looked human. And as he looked back at her, his winter frost eyes entirely focused on her face to ensure she was unharmed, Harper realized the terrifying truth. The contract was a lie. She wasn't an asset anymore, and he wasn't just her employer. They had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The safe house was a windowless basement apartment in a neighborhood that didn't ask questions. Arthur had navigated them through the subterranean maze for an hour before they emerged into a garage. It was 3 a.m. Arthur was in the other room, making encrypted calls to Marshal Vincent's loyalists. Silas was dead, left behind in the rain. The war had officially escalated from boardrooms to the streets. Harper sat on the edge of a worn mattress. She was still barefoot, her emerald dress ruined with mud and blood. Vincent sat in a wooden chair under a single, harsh bulb. His jacket was gone, his shirt was unbuttoned, exposing a muscular chest marred by old scars and the fresh, ragged hole in his left shoulder. Harper had just finished wrapping it with gauze and pressure tape from the Safehouse medical kit. Her hands, which had been so steady tying off the bandage, were now trembling uncontrollably. The adrenaline had finally burned out, leaving nothing but shock. She walked over to the small sink and scrubbed his blood off her hands. The water ran pink, then clear. "You did well today," Vincent said. His voice was tired, but the gravelly depth was returning. "You kept your head. You found the exit." Harper turned off the water. She leaned against the sink, gripping the porcelain edge. "Silas is dead." Silas knew the risks. He was compensated for them. "Compensated," Harper repeated, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her lips. "Right. The hazard clause. 5 million to a charity of my choice if I catch a bullet." She turned to face him. "Is that what this is to you? Just numbers on a ledger?" Vincent watched her, his expression unreadable. "It is what we agreed upon. A transaction." "A transaction." Harper walked toward him, the fear and exhaustion boiling over into anger. "Carmine tried to execute us in the street, Vincent. You threw your body over mine. You took a bullet meant for the passenger compartment. Was that in the contract? Clause 7. The CEO must use himself as a human shield." Vincent didn't flinch. "You are my wife. I protect what belongs to me." "I don't belong to you," Harper yelled, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "I belong to a piece of paper in your lawyer's briefcase. In 11 months, I pack my bags, I take my money, and I disappear. That's the deal." Vincent stood up. The sudden movement made him wince, but he ignored the pain, closing the distance between them until he was towering over her. The air in the small room suddenly felt completely devoid of oxygen. "Is that what you want?" Vincent asked softly. The dangerous, raw intensity from the alley was back in his eyes. "Do you want to disappear, Harper?" Harper looked up at him. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say she wanted her boring, safe, cynical life back. But she thought about the emptiness of her apartment. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the tunnel, frantic and terrifyingly human. "I want," she started, her voice breaking. "I want to know what the hell is happening to me." Vincent reached out with his right hand. He didn't grab her chin this time. He cupped her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a streak of mud and rain from her skin. The touch was agonizingly tender. "You audited my life, Harper," Vincent murmured, stepping closer. His chest brushed against hers. "You walked into my world, looked at the chaos, and you didn't run. You didn't cower. You stood at a table full of monsters and bared your teeth." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm against her lips. "The contract is void," he whispered. Harper's breath hitched. "Void?" "It requires me to keep you safe," Vincent said, his voice a low vibration that she felt in her own chest. "I failed tonight, and it requires you to be a ghost. You aren't a ghost. You are the only real thing in my entire life." He didn't wait for her to process it. He closed the remaining distance and kissed her. It wasn't the calculated, branded kiss of the wedding day. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was a man who had stared death in the face and realized what he stood to lose. Harper gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to grip his uninjured shoulder. The kiss was a collision. It was heat and rain and the metallic taste of adrenaline. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring all her fear, her cynicism, and her undeniable, terrifying attraction into the contact. Vincent groaned, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame. The cold basement, the war outside, the blood, it all vanished, reduced to the burning point of contact between them. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes dark with a possessive fire that had nothing to do with contracts or empires. "No more timelines," Vincent commanded softly, his lips brushing hers as he spoke. "No more running. You stay with me. You build this empire with me, and we burn Carmine to the ground together. Deal?" Harper looked at the dangerous, broken, magnificent man holding her. The cynical auditor was dead, buried in the mud of the construction site. The woman standing here was a queen ready to claim her throne. She reached up, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, and pulled his mouth back down to hers. "Deal," she breathed. "The ink on the contract is gone, but the blood on the ledger is just beginning to dry." Harper started as a cynical pawn looking for a payout, but she's just evolved into the queen of the most dangerous empire in the city. Will her sharp mind and Vincent's ruthless power be enough to dismantle Carmine's forces? Or will their new, fiery connection be the weakness that gets them both killed? If you want to see how this Mafia war ends, smash that like button, share this with every romance lover you know, and hit subscribe right now. The finale is going to be explosive, and you won't want to miss it.